They say politics is show business for ugly people, but those vying for the leadership of the Tory party are quite a handsome bunch. This appointment is, in my view, the most important one since 1975, when the Tory party chose the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. 4 years later, she won an election and took over a country knee-deep in unemployment, inflation, union deadlock, low growth and high debt. By 1987, Britain was a global, economic, military and diplomatic powerhouse. How different our story might have been if it wasn't for her vision, leadership and tough economic love. And here we are again in 2022, having effectively dragged ourselves back to the 1970s with soaring inflation, a massive national debt and union chaos, this time self-inflicted as a result of the disastrous and, in my view, totally failed experiment of lockdowns. So where do we go from here? Well, we need tough economic love once again. Public sector pay rises or cranking up departmental spending just aren't an option, because more cash spent is more borrowing and more cash printed is more inflation. And inflation, the worst stealth tax of them all, which disproportionately impacts the poorest, is economic quicksand. Stagflation, an impossible combination of low growth and inflation, is something our next Prime Minister must battle to avoid. If we fall into that trap, we could be in it for decades. So whoever gets the job needs to understand the economy intimately well. Somebody with an entrepreneurial or financial background, with a deep understanding of the economic challenges that this country faces. We need an anti-woke Prime Minister who will cut back on the worst excesses of the online harms bill, which is effectively a law against free speech, or, as the impressive leadership hopeful Kemi Badenoch brilliantly put it in yesterday's Times, it's legislating for hurt feelings. More on her shortly. Our next Prime Minister must wage a war on woke and must win it. Woke must not pay. Otherwise, you will have men who identify as women continuing to use female-only spaces, competing against biological women in sport, and reversing decades of female emancipation. More protections are needed for gay people too, in the face of misogynistic, homophobic trans ideology. Keir Starmer's inability to define what a woman actually is ought to be his undoing, and will be if the Tories exploit what is widespread public anger about what's happening to the culture and institutions of this country. The next Prime Minister needs to be someone that actually believes in Brexit, that campaigned for Brexit. Sure, Boris Johnson got Brexit done, for which he deserves huge credit. But it's going to take political courage, a strong will and balls of steel to face down the EU over the appalling Northern Ireland Protocol, which must be torn up. No organisation outside of this country should be defining our territorial boundaries. Beware the snake oil words of some hopefuls saying they will seek to make Brexit work. That's code for diluting it, undoing it, reversing it. And we need someone dignified, a grown-up in the room. Somebody sensible, a safe pair of hands, someone with a work ethic, with discipline and a sustained history of being straight with the public and of telling the truth. Notwithstanding his many colossal talents, it was Boris Johnson's character, or lack thereof, his integrity, or lack thereof, his morals, or lack thereof, that ultimately did for him. But the Tories do need someone that's got Johnson's charm, his charisma and success at the ballot box, and who can build on the positive aspects of his legacy, of which there is plenty. The Tories need someone who can unite the party too. Lots of talented backbenchers were frozen out of Johnson's administration because they were not partisan loyalists. That was a mistake. A new cabinet under a new Prime Minister must represent the broad church that is the Conservative Party, and there must be a diversity of not just backgrounds, cultures and races, but opinions too. So where do we go from here? Well, it's my view that all roads lead to Rishi Sunak. And I called it in late January of this year, when I then called for Boris Johnson to go. Take a look at my big opinion all those months ago. Partygate or no Partygate, the party is over for Boris. It's time, gentlemen, please. The fat lady has sung and the PM's goose is cooked. He has actually stuffed himself, if I'm honest. Dishy Rishi, let's get busy. If this famously hard-working teetotaler at number 11 gets the top job, I'll drink to that. Cup of tea, obviously. Yeah, could have straightened my tie. That was on the 30th of January, 2022, when the Mail on Sunday reported that Boris Johnson was planning to once again cave in to sage scientists and needlessly cancel Christmas. That great paper reported that it was the intervention of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lord Frost, and yes, Rishi Sunak, that brought the Prime Minister to his senses. So it wasn't Boris that was Mr. Freedom all along, it was Mr. Sunak. Sunak ticks all the boxes for me, a reported lockdown skeptic from the beginning. Notwithstanding that Sunak was responsible for the complex but ultimately successful policy of furlough, no mean feat, and a great example of how he innovates and how he gets things done, it's been an open secret in government that Sunak has pushed back against the worst excesses of SAGE and their demands, and indeed Boris Johnson and his splash-the-cash spendthrift instincts. It's only thanks to Sunak's principled foot on the fiscal brake that this country isn't deeper in the red and in more economic trouble. He got criticism for Eat Out to Help Out, but it was brilliant for hospitality. It was relatively cheap and was proof that this guy wanted to unlock and stay unlocked. And he has a conscience. He said in his spring statement in March that leaving debt to future generations is morally wrong. How right he is. I want someone with that conscience and that principle in number 10. And this is a guy willing to deliver a tough message. This weekend, he's seeking the leadership on a campaign that Britain cannot afford tax cuts. Now, we can debate the rights and wrongs of that. I'm personally torn on the issue. But what does this tell you about Rishi Sunak? He knows full well that promising tax cuts, which all of the other hopefuls are doing, would help him get elected. But instead, he's willing to be straight with the British people and with the Tory party membership and say, no, the cupboard's bare, that tax cuts will come, but only in time. This willingness to tell the public what they don't want to hear is a rare and precious quality in a politician. Sunak would also be Britain's first Asian Prime Minister, and his story is the perfect British story. He is living the British dream. A son of immigrant parents, his mother opened a chemist shop and his father was a GP. He entered the city and made his fortune. He shouldn't have to cover up or airbrush his wealth. It should be his key selling point. His story tells young Brits of all backgrounds and origins that they can achieve great things in this country. And it's not his fault that his wife is incredibly rich. If only Mrs. Dolan was worth a few more bob. He's slick, he's charming, he's polished. He's a teetotal workaholic known for 16-hour days. He's a family guy with just one wife. That's right, one wife, there's a novelty, and two much-loved daughters. For me, Rishi Sunak is the only choice for our next Prime Minister, and if the Tories want to keep Starmer out of number 10, I think he's their best bet at the next election. And woke warriors with an axe to grind and division to sow will struggle to peddle their hatred on Britain's first Prime Minister of colour. It will, in fact, be another great moment in the history of this country after electing the first female PM in '79. I keep an open mind about the other candidates. I think it's a strong field. And never say never that one of the others could do a great job. If it's not Rishi, I'll bite your hand off for Badenoch. And I'll say bravo to Braverman. Both brilliant and talented politicians. But I certainly don't want this hunt. So I personally anoint Rishi Sunak as our next Prime Minister. I think he'll be honest, straight and disciplined enough to get this country back on the road to recovery. All roads lead to this talented, energetic and young politician. Frankly, I'll have a Rishi fit if he doesn't get it. And his appointment can't come Sunak enough.